This webinar was recorded for subrecipients of the Tennessee Strong Families Grant on February 11th, 2026. Kelsey Warren, the Seamless Coach, was our subject matter expert presenter. The session helped participants learn how to spot early signs of burnout across teams and implement values-aligned well-being and practices that improve focus, motivation, and psychological safety before performance dips. The webinar also served to help grantees discover burnout recovery strategies that translate to more efficient processes, stronger team collaboration, and improved outcomes in people-facing functions. The slides and reference materials are posted on our webpage for your reference and review.
So welcome everyone. My name is Kelsey. We're going to do things a little bit differently. We're not only going to engage a little bit differently, especially because we are virtual, but we also are going to talk about burnout from a lens that maybe you haven't heard before. So this is our very first question. What word comes to mind when you hear the word burnout? This will create a bit of a word cloud for us if you haven't used this before. So the things that we are seeing big are the things that are being reported most frequently. Overwhelm, a resounding yes. Drained, being sick, hiding. I've done a lot of these and I've never seen that word before, but I think that makes a lot of sense. So if you want to put in the chat why you put that and give some background, that would be helpful. Exhaustion, fatigue, unmotivated, go away, just kind of wanting to conserve energy, maybe it sounds like. This is great. So we're all very familiar, right? Especially in this career field, we know this is a thing. Here's something though that a leader asked me at one point, and it was a really pivotal question to assess how I'm showing up for others. How do you know when you are getting stressed? Mandy, thank you. She said, I work in a virtual space and I think it's easy to get quiet and hide from tasks and people when things feel heavy and overwhelming. Definitely much easier in a virtual space too. More and more downtime to recover. So not like, Sunday night rolls around and you're still feeling tired, increased irritability, snippy, snappy. Yep, these things come up kind of more short, frustrated, yes to everything or nothing. So very more like black and white type of thinking, short-tempered. Yes, Sunday scaries every night. Ugh. Sunday blues, Sunday scaries. Definitely cynicism, being frustrated, short-tempered. Everything just feels really heavy, right? It's like it feels almost like we are trying to just keep everything up. And then slowly it's just like the pressure starts to come. So these are really good examples. One of the first things that comes to my mind, especially how I show up at work, is when I'm getting extra stressed, the desire to like get fully dressed or, do my hair, that kind of, it starts to decline. So if my hair is just like on top of my head, for me, that is at least a key sign of like, okay, I'm not having enough energy to get ready in the morning. So let's see, we have enough responses that if I did this, it would sort it for us and we'll see what happens. We have some fatigue, some irritability, apathy, overwhelm. So just general kind of, these do not misalign with the symptoms of burnout. So we're talking about stress right now, just general stress. This impacts how we show up for others pretty significantly. So as helping professions, this is something to be mindful of, right? It's already a hard job, and are we making it harder on ourselves? Is the system making it harder on ourselves? So we have those two. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. How common is burnout? Have you experienced it? Someone on your team? Maybe in your personal life or in your organization? It's like we know it's happening, but it's very interesting to see. So we have 10 responses so far, and we know that this is a huge thing. It's a huge problem. Something that I'm really passionate about is that we don't really have this full understanding about what it is or what to do about it, and what society or sometimes even our education or our industry will tell us is helpful and well-intentioned, but not necessarily a fix or a solution to this. And I'm really passionate about that. So usually when I do this, and it's interesting, the last time I asked this very specific slide, it was with 9 different groups from the same organization. And they all ranked, I have experienced burnout way lower then someone on my team has experienced burnout. So what that tells me is that they could see it in other people. Again, how are we showing up? How is the stress impacting? But they were not self-identifying that they had experienced burnout, which of course, if we're surveying most people in the organization, then we know there's maybe some disconnect there. So is anyone surprised by this? You can either put in the chat or come off mute if you would like. Is anyone surprised by this? Does this feel pretty accurate? Feels accurate. Yeah, Sierra. Feels pretty accurate to me. We're not surprised by it. Some thumbs up. So 4.6, 4.6, this is out of 5, and then 4.7, someone in my personal life. We'll get into a little bit about that here in a second. Okay, so we're setting kind of the context, the groundwork. We all get stressed. We have really been impacted by burnout in some way or another. So what are we actually doing about it? Here's the next question. What is the cure for burnout? I totally agree that people are naming it, and that is encouraging. I have some that say self-care, 5, 2 say none of the above, 7 say self-care. I have about half. I'm going to leave it another second. Sometimes I like to get ahead of myself and talk, and then I give away the answer. Mandy says I think it depends on your definition of self-care. So that's a good question. Some of you may be thinking, is this a trick question? Maybe it is. So you have 8 for self-care. Caring less, meaning good work. Yes, good work-life boundaries balance. I'll tell you my beef with caring less also in a second. So you have none of the above. So here's the thing with this. These are the things that we all hear. This is what we've been pretty much preached to throughout the, not only in high school, but especially in our education. Self-care is the way. This is the thing that we have to do to prevent burnout. This is the only way. This is faulty for a few different reasons. Someone already mentioned, like, what is your definition of self-care? You can't necessarily say that what works for one person works for your partner or works for you. And also, what is self-care and what does it look like as it relates to stress? So we have this like resilience side of self-care. We have like what I call like almost radical self-care, the things like boundary setting, having really hard conversations, making your doctor's appointments, right? Those are like acts of self-care. They can be. In the same vein, so can taking a bubble bath or getting your hair done or going shopping or out to a movie with friends. That can be considered self-care. All of these things are good. I am an advocate of self-care. I think it's important. I'm also a really big advocate for vacations because you should be enjoying your life that you're working so hard to live. However, these things are doing nothing really to address the stress that you're experiencing every day at work. They are only helping you prepare for it a little bit better. So it's not ever going to completely remove what those stressors are. Same thing with caring less. So Brittany clarified, meaning like good work-life boundaries and balance. Yes, those things are also important. However, what is caring less? And is this really effective? How do you do it? What does that mean? And when it comes to engagement, we know how important that this is to your well-being. We spend so much time at work, sometimes more than with our own families. We want to be showing up and engaged in the work we're doing on some level. Because if we're not, then, what are we doing? So that is not necessarily the cure for the stress either. Same thing with more money. Now, I would assume, just based on the professional nature of this group, none of us are necessarily here saying like, I would love to make $700,000 a year. But we do think that we need money also to take care of ourselves. Money requires a lot of the self-care. It requires things like vacations. It requires you to be able to advocate for yourself in many different ways. It requires you to take care of yourself and be resilient for the many different things that life throws at us. However, total pursuit of money from an evidence-based lens doesn't do anything for our well-being either. So for that reason, it is none of the above. However, if you have tried any of the things on the previous slide, you are not wrong. This is why I say I'm on a big mission about this, because this is just like what we're all told. So what kind of things have you tried to combat burnout? You can just list a few here, and then we'll talk about how helpful those things have been. Therapy, we love it. Meditation, reframing the source of burnout, developing meaningful relationships. Yeah, that connection. Leaving work at work. This is an art and a skill. Leaning into support systems, Self-care strategies, vacations, therapy, priority list, therapy, more sleep, more time for myself, being conscious to complete the stress cycle. Yes, that's a good one. Vacation, setting boundaries, more breaks throughout the day, taking care of yourself physically, talk more about that resilience, days off. These are all so helpful. And we'll kind of get into a little bit more of that, why we need to balance this stress scale. Someone mentioned the stress cycle. Breathing deep, especially in the moment, is helpful. So we have, which is interesting that I categorize as this, self-care, vacations. We have rest, therapy, and there's a few new responses. Breathing deep, support systems, boundaries, meditation. So these are all really good answers. How is this working out for us? So if I went back to the previous slide, all of us are still kind of experiencing it, right? Mandy said it's usually not. It doesn't work out so well. Like, these are kind of idealistic things. Again, I think if you can align, this is maybe a separate topic and conversation, but if you can align what you're doing in a way that works best with your strengths, your values, what your family and your personal needs are, it can really feel kind of smooth, and you can have time to do all these things and really feel in kind of this professional balance, we'll call it. But in this career field, especially, or just this general industry, it is hard, especially when there's lots of things at play inside of our control, some of them not. So this is good conversation. Now we're going to get a little bit more personal, just to you in this moment, and talk about some symptoms of burnout and see kind of where the group is falling. So about half of us have answered so far. Carla says lack of motivation. Exhaustion. This is usually high whenever I ask it. And exhaustion in itself does not necessarily mean that you are experiencing burnout, because of the world and life in general and technology. Like, we're always on this kind of a thing. So I don't know how your sleep habits are. Mine, with an almost 1-year-old, not great at the moment. So I'm always feeling exhausted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm experiencing burnout in this moment. However, when we are looking at this, and we look at all of these symptoms together, these are the burnout symptoms. So if you want to put just a quick thumbs up, or in the chat, you can mention this. Did we know that these were burnout symptoms? I think at the beginning, we talked about exhaustion. We talked about irritability, cynicism. Good. Yay. Okay, I'm glad to see that. That's good. Sometimes we think it is just exhaustion, or it's hard to compare against other things that could be comorbid to burnout or just seem similarly. So yes, I am really happy to see that this group is educated on the symptoms of burnout.
Kelsey, I also think it's really, if you can go back real quick, I think it's important to note that the last question was the lowest. I'm experiencing a lack of confidence in my ability to do my work effectively. Can you talk about that? Or like, what is your experience with other groups? Because I think that like speaks volumes to the great work that these people are doing, but you're also like killing yourself in the process, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. This one is typically lower. So what this one refers back to is actually professional efficacy. So one of the hallmark or definition symptoms of burnout is reduced professional efficacy. So that's your confidence in your ability to get things done, not only effectively, but like how you're used to operating. And so we see this a lot in people that are very compassionate, or would like maybe lean more like perfectionistic or high achieving, that they're used to operating in a certain way. And when burnout sets in, you don't really feel as effective, or things that used to seem easy become a lot more difficult. Sending an email feels way more of a struggle than it used to. So that kind of a thing. That is not, so we're feeling confident. It looks like this group overall, it's not overwhelmingly huge, and that's encouraging. This is one of the end stages of burnout, like before you get into actual physical symptoms of things like anxiety, stress, blood pressure, that kind of thing. So this is really where you also see a lot of like performance improvement plans being inactive. People will often leave roles at this time because they feel like I've already now dropped some balls, and I have like a little chart that shows more about that part. So it's kind of like the point of no return in a lot of sense. So it's good to see that it's not super high here in this group. When you have high efficacy, it is a protective factor against burnout. So I know we might kind of be from different areas here, but how has your organization or something like maybe you have done tried to combat burnout? What have you seen happen? Yeah, Mandy said, I love what you're getting at though for Brooke for asking that because it might speak to the unawareness if we are exhausted but still trucking along like always. Yes. So some good things here, increasing relationship with and among employees. Yeah, just that connectedness. I think that came up on previous slides. Work-life balance, self-care reminders, self-care days, even better. My organization offers mental health days once every 6 months, I believe. No questions asked. You could just take it. So that's nice to have as an additional benefit. Boundaries, awareness learning sessions like these for burnout. That would be great. Flexibility in work hours, providing education, definitely around secondary trauma, stress. Culture of positive feedback, reward, and recognition is a huge protective factor as well to some of these stressors. Like, right, we can't get away from the stress that we experience, but we can feel appreciated for it. So that does help with some of that cynicism and the resentment piece. Generous PTO, love to see it. Flexibility. Someone in the chat said mental health days as well. So these are all good organizational initiatives, flexible schedules, education, self-care, employee connection. I do have a little bit of beef with these things as well, and I'll get into that more in the next part. But these are all what you would typically see as an organizational response to just trying to take care of the employee, more so in the like employee wellness space. So what we all reported on that slide earlier is not uncommon with the rest of the workflow. So in 2023, and it's kind of pretty similar for the 2024 and 2025 Gallup Global Workplace Report, 75% of the workforce has reported experiencing burnout at one point or another. That's a lot. It's probably higher than that, actually. And so that's most of us, just truthfully in this room. So that's, I usually, if I'm in person, I will have everyone stand up and answer some questions, and then I tell them to sit down, and most people are still standing by the end of this. So it is an interesting thing to know that so many of us have experienced it. So why am I here and why am I on this soapbox? I'm going to share a little bit more of a personal story about my own experience with burnout. Here you can see I am no longer burnt out, but this is what I could have looked like back in the day, maybe when Brooke was working with me. But this even was prior to working and interacting with her. But I have kind of made a name, let's say, for myself, saying that self-care and vacations don't cure burnout. So we're going to learn why here in just a second. But I want you to know and be encouraged, as someone said in the chat at the very beginning, that just because burnout is common, it doesn't have to be your norm. And so that's important. For me, does anyone know where Minot, North Dakota is? Just really quick. No, we see some head shaking. Brooks, yeah, sad face. It is a very remote location. North Dakota is remote in general. We're thinking like very windy temperatures, -60 type of vibe that you have there. So we'll set the stage there. I was at a bachelor's in psychology at this point. I was working at a family advocacy center on base as a domestic abuse victim advocate. It is this terrible place to be sent for the military. I was excited for the opportunity, though, to work with the government. I was a contractor at the time, but I worked in a mental health clinic surrounded by really, really cool people, PhD level psychologists, MSWs, like licensed clinical social workers, the whole thing. So I was housed in a mental health clinic as a domestic abuse victim advocate. We dealt with child and adult maltreatment. And so my role was a 24/7 crisis response type of situation, had to go back in my car and would be there to support victims of domestic violence, whether they were the active duty member or the partner or whoever the civilian was, or sometimes they were both active duty. So that was my role. I actually really enjoyed it. They had kind of let me be in that role so that I could continue my MSW internship at the same time. And so this was great for me. But over time, just things started to take a shift. I started experiencing some of those symptoms that we talked about earlier. Sunday scaries was happening more and more frequently. Sunday night would roll around and I could feel myself just like getting extremely anxious. I would just feel very like worried. I was avoiding things, like not trying to get ready for the week. I was just procrastinating. I didn't want to do anything. And then Monday morning would roll around and I would just feel terrible. It felt like there was just an elephant sitting on my chest every morning. A lot of times, truthfully, because I didn't have paid time off, I just kind of took time off and I was a contractor. There wasn't always a ton of work to do in that space, which was a good thing. I would just call in like a lot of times, at least one day a week, which is terrible to say and look back at. But this was kind of what I was experiencing. I was just a way to avoid and get away from things. I had experienced at one point sitting at my desk, and I had, over a series of 6 months, increased migraines and just a whole swirl of things. I had tried everything. I had went to therapy. I was going to the gym. I did take some time off, more extended, and nothing was really helping. So I had the phone in my hand and I was ready to call 911 in my office to come get me and take me to the hospital, because I just was like, I think having a panic attack, if I could describe it that way, just really from trying to send an email. I just didn't know what else I could do. I didn't really see a way out. I didn't want to quit my job, but I also didn't know what was wrong with me. I just thought that there was something like medically and seriously wrong with me. So this was all happening, and I just kind of felt broken. I felt like there was nothing that I could do to get out of it. I didn't know who to talk to about it. Everyone else around me seemed fine. When in walked Maddie, who was one of my good friends who worked as program assistant at the time. She's also a social worker now, and we kind of have connected and helped to mentor her into that journey, which is amazing. But she helped me in this moment. She walked in and saw that I was kind of just a mess, and she took me home. She was my neighbor. She lived down the street, and she actually stayed with me for a few days to just make sure that I was okay. So I took more time off. I did end up going to the doctor. And I like to point out that even if I would have taken that first route and called, whoever to come get me, I think that would have also been okay in this circumstance. Like, I was at the level where maybe I could have used that help as well. But Maddie thankfully stepped in at just the right time. And throughout that, I calmed down a little bit. We were just talking about things. I was sharing more, just like, I think something's wrong. And I went back to the doctor. And so what was going on with me in this exact moment was not necessarily a panic attack. So in light of my therapy and trying to get help for all of these things that I was experiencing, constant tiredness, irritability, like unmotivated in work and personal life. This sounds familiar, right? This sounds like potentially some sort of diagnosis that we maybe are familiar with. I had been diagnosed with anxiety in the past, so maybe it was just that I didn't really know what was going on. So going back to therapy and working with my doctor, I got on Zoloft, which is helpful for so many people. And for me, it caused something called serotonin syndrome. So in that moment, I was having a physical, like, actual response. And that's like why my heart was racing. I was having like all these headaches and things. So this happened to me because I wasn't depressed in this moment. I was stressed. So a perfect storm of a whole bunch of things happened to me to create this event that really kind of changed my approach to things, because I was a little confused and honestly like a little disappointed that the people around me, especially in my physical work environment, didn't think to mention, is this something that could be burnout related? You have been working a lot, or you're also doing your MSW at this time, like you're taking on a lot of extra things. Is this something that you could consider? And I just felt a little let down by that. So I kind of went on my own mission to figure out what exactly was going on with me in that moment. And again, disclaimer, having been a clinical therapist in the past, we love therapy. Please use it. I also think medication, time and place, and please use it too. But in my case, that wasn't necessarily a helpful solution, but that's all we knew. And that's what we were told. That's what everyone around me who were also mental health clinicians thought. I was maybe depressed or experiencing some sort of like episode or like acute type of anxiety. And what I came to find out over time, and I'd be curious to know like where this group falls as far as like knowing and like being aware of this, is that burnout at the time is not in the DSM-5. It's not a medical diagnosis. It's not a mental health diagnosis. It's coded in the ICD by medical professionals as an occupational phenomenon. So, especially in an organization, you may have had a boss or a manager that said, "Oh, you're experiencing burnout. You think go to therapy or use EAP." And these are why things like the workplace wellness industry, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, is massively failing. Because as therapists, we know, or as mental health professionals, we know, or as anyone in a helping field, social workers, that we are also struggling with this, and like we're a little unsure like how to advise other people sometimes on how to deal with this as well. So this kind of also led me down to the direction of my PhD, which is industrial and organizational psychology. So I wanted to understand more about why this work stress is happening and what we can actually do to help people in the moment. So what we know is that burnout, according to the World Health Organization, is chronic stress over time in a work or occupational setting. And so for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to think, okay, burnout is chronic stress in a work setting, and this happens over time. That truthfully is the definition of burnout. If you continue reading on the World Health Organization, it also says not to be used in place of other essentially like life stressors. So we'll hear things like caregiver burnout. We may hear neurodivergent burnout. There's lots of these things that are very real stressors, but for the context of the word burnout, we're talking about occupational stress. So this is like these little micro cuts, these little tiny things at work that add up. So if this is something that happens at work, then why are the recommendations specifically and typically solely by the organization individual or I-frame approaches? This is on the person, even though the work environment or the role specifically is contributing to stress. And so the approach kind of has to be combined. We have our personal accountability and reliability that we need to take ownership of. And then the organization also plays a role in what they're doing to create some of this work stress. So I like to look at this kind of like a scale. We have demands on one side. So this is things like office politics, potentially. This could be things like not having boundaries or leadership not modeling boundaries or healthy kind of work-life balance. It could be living in constant crisis. It could be being short-staffed. Red tape that we all, I'm working for the government, I know about red tape. So there's that too. Workload, teams. This is my personal stressor currently. I am a big Mac and Google fan, and when I started my most recent role, they use Teams. And I don't know if anyone else has this struggle, but why are there 7 places to get to the same document? Where are they located? What is loop? I don't know these things, so I'm still learning. So that would be like considered a demand or a stressor for me right now, just because it's kind of slowing how I can communicate and like be efficient in my work. Scope creep, I think we've all probably experienced to some degree, right? These are all demands, and these are not necessarily anything that you're doing wrong as a human. They just kind of exist. And so when we're thinking about all of these things on the other side, these are stressors. The resources, so we have this demands and resources, are the things that help support and balance the scale, which is why things like self-care, vacations, the time off, support, all of those things that you put on that slide are still really valuable in helping us keep this scale balance. We know about risk factors in the work that we do. Those are considered like workplace demands. And then resources are considered like your protective factors. So we still want to have boundaries and take care of ourselves. And, you know, for me, I had Maddie. We still want to go to therapy to help balance out this scale, because it's going to equip you so much more for when the stressful times do come. If you have a role that is very like feast or famine, that's kind of how the one that I was in. I was either with a victim for, 48 hours straight nonstop, or I didn't hear anything from anyone for like 3 or 4 days. And so that was like, I had to create some resources for myself to be able to balance some of that. But when this is still unbalanced, we don't have enough resources and the demands are either increasing or we haven't done anything with them, this is still stress. And too much of this equation for too long then creates burnout. So over time, we're thinking like it takes a while. You don't just get into a role and in 2 weeks I'm experiencing burnout. We may throw the word around, but then truthfully, like that's not necessarily what's happening. So again, we'll go back to the burnout symptoms, and it looks a little bit like a cycle. So Mandy put like the unawareness of it. And I think that was a really good call out, because you can see here the symptoms of burnout don't really lend well to you getting yourself out of this. We're already tired. Like this is already one more thing that we have to do. Like I'm exhausted to my core thinking about how I can show up differently at work, or like brainstorm with my manager about ways to reduce my stress as the last thing that I want to do sometimes. And then we get into the cynicism and resentment. The thing about this, and let me know if you've ever had this conversation, something like your friend telling you or your partner telling you, if you hate your job so much, why don't you just quit? Brooke's laughing. 100% Mandy said, right? We've all probably had that conversation a time or two. And then like, it's like at that point, you're like, oh, I am really like venting all the time about work. Like I'm maybe being a little bit cynical. And so the thing about cynicism and getting yourself out of this is that you don't really usually realize it in the moment. Like that's part of being cynical. It's until someone else tells you, or after the fact, you can reflect and be like, oh my gosh, I was like so negative, so distrustful. I was bringing it home. I was like, bringing it to all my friends. They were probably so frustrated with me. But truthfully, like this is just a symptom of the stress. Like we don't in this moment know what to do with it. We're not doing anything to address it. And so the resentment is just continuing to increase. So then we move into, as I mentioned, that reduced professional efficacy. This is when you are just feeling generally unmotivated. You may be dropping balls intentionally or unintentionally, right? In my case, Brooke said the worst part is that you don't share good parts. Yeah. Yes. I have implemented a brag bucket Friday with my two teams that I have supervised, the culture team and an employee experience team. And I make them do it. And I tell them it can be big or small, personal or work, but it needs to be something. And maybe sometimes it is just that you got through the week and that's fine. But we do sometimes have to acknowledge in those moments. We know gratitude is a good practice for some of that. So when we are dropping balls, so like in my case, let's say the procrastination involved with just trying to like work up the energy to send one email caused me to be behind. Was it intentional? And I was actively saying like, I hate this and I'm not going to send this email. No, but the stress over time was like starting to impact probably how I was showing up. No one ever told me, but again, I was feeling guilty because I knew that I wasn't probably showing up in the best way. I knew what my inbox looked like. I knew what my to-do list that I just like kind of sat frozen and staring at constantly was. So then the guilt is also tiring too. And I think as helping professionals, this is something that's exponentially increased for us. It's just so hard because who are we helping? We're helping people that need our help. And so when we can't show up our best for them, it feels not great. It feels like if we're feeling cynical about the people that we're helping and that we're working with, like, yes, in the moment, sometimes that's just a coping mechanism. We have to insert maybe some humor or some, boundaries that way. But then you still do, like, they don't deserve that. They don't deserve my, bad, frustrated, exhausted attitude. But then neither do you, right? You don't deserve it either. You should be able to feel engaged at work. So this is a whole cycle. Kind of what I just described, this scale is called the jobs, demand, and resources model. This is an industrial and organizational psychology lens to burnout, which takes into account that we have job demands that could also include things at work, home, how you show up at home impacts how you show up at work and vice versa. But it acknowledges that we have emotional demands, and we have work stressors that increase this stress. And then we have resources that we use at work that can help us. Colleague support, team cohesion, harmony, autonomy. So like this is the absence of micromanagement, a coaching lens instead of just performance-based feedback, a supportive manager or supervisor. So you can see here in this model, right, if our job demands increase, so does our exhaustion, which then decreases performance. If we don't have enough resources at work, our cynicism increases, and then also so our performance declines. And so it's interesting when I'm working in consulting with leadership or organizations, and when I'm showing them this, it's very clear that it's important for us to be engaged. It's important for us to have stress reduction, and we perform better that way. And it's also in the organization's best interest to prioritize these things, because then we're performing better, less absenteeism, less presenteeism, that kind of a thing. So how often are we getting these resources on the bottom left? It's a hard thing, right? It's a hard thing for it to constantly be happening all the time. But there are some areas where we can advocate for ourselves or do things a little bit differently. So when we think about burnout and kind of what creates these areas or buckets of stress, we want to think about like things that create misalignment or alignment. So we saw control and autonomy on there. Really, this is just letting the person be empowered to do the work that they're going to do. Workload, we hear this all the time, that workload, of course, contributes to burnout. I'm sorry, but it is, has anyone seen a famous influencer, many across the board, share something to the effect of, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life? Yes, we've seen this. And then it gets shared and it just like enrages me. And sometimes like my clients or people that follow me will send it to me just to like rage bait me, because they know that I'm like, of course, this is absolutely no, this doesn't make any sense. You can still love what you do and work too much. Like the body is like only a body. You can't work 85 hours for an entire year with no breaks and not expect that something's breaking down. Brittany says, I love what I do and you work hard at it. Yes. And you can't do it all the time. So workload absolutely still does impact burnout. And so if anyone says that to you, especially like they try to kind of push it, oh, it's just compassion fatigue. No, like we can still overwork, and this is a thing, and it's a problem, especially when we can talk about people that have commutes or community-based. You're driving all over the place. Brooke and I know about that. So that like extends the workload, even if you're not actually working, like you still are. So you're thinking about your notes and what you could have done differently and how you're preparing for the next one and how you get to the next place and where you're going to go to the bathroom, all these things. These are stressors, right? I could go on and on about that. We have reward and fairness, right? This is like being compensated well. This is like being in an environment where you are recognized for your hard work, as I mentioned. The community aspect, love it. Love that you all are here. This helps bring some of those bonds. We talked about the relatedness, the connectedness as a benefit. Community for me has been one of the most helpful things. I had been an independent consultant and business owner for about 5 years before I just went back to work in November, strictly because I was sick of working remotely and by myself for that long. Like I recognize that as a business owner, I could control all of these 6 areas and still community. Like there was nothing that I could do to like, even in my personal life, extend myself to have some of that connection. So I decided to go back to work, and that was a good fit for me. And still do this too on the side, which is great. And then we have this values section. So number 6, when we're talking about this, is not just the values of the organization. These are your values as an employee. So your workplace values. This is how you show up to work. It's what you find meaningful and motivating at work. So for example, if you tell me that you really value structure and stability and you want to like know the direction and you want to go work at a tech startup, I might question some alignment there of some of those values, right? Because tech is extremely unstable right now. There's not a lot of stability. You're more looking at an ambiguous, probably type of work environment. But you may have other benefits, things that you like, creativity, right? The ability to be a subject matter expert, that kind of a thing. So this is just a different lens that you can look at values, but values when misaligned, whether it's with the role or the work environment or the organization itself, can create enough stress to cause burnout. So I'll let you marinate on that for just a second. Sierra said, I loved how you mentioned community because personal and professional community is so important and needed. Yes, I agree. The professional community can also be difficult to find. I think it's something that you sometimes have to pay to be involved in a lot of cases too, which makes it difficult. But if you do or are able, I would strongly recommend that you just find one area, whether it's paid or not, that you could get involved in. And it doesn't have to be that you're volunteering, but it just a group of professionals on some level to be around people that know what you're doing and that they get it, that are not your coworkers, that you don't necessarily have to worry about, how much you're sharing, that kind of thing. It's super helpful and valuable. So that's just an aside there. But this is the work of Dr. Christina Masloch. She is probably the foremost researcher in burnout. She's the only one with like a valid and reliable instrument and measure the areas of work-life survey. So that's what these are. So if you're thinking about another lens of like what stresses me out at work specifically, you can kind of go into these buckets. Like, is it a value misalignment? Is it something where I don't feel like my workload is good or that I'm being micromanaged? Maybe I am a little isolated in my role because I do work community-based and I never see people or that kind of a thing. So this is just an aside if you want to look deeper into her. She is, if we're talking about burnout in evidence-based format, this is the person that you would want to look for.
So in my case, name again, Kelsey, so I can jot it down for you.
In the chat.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'll send it with all the follow-up information too.
There are other people too, but she's just the most prolific, let's say, and started it at first. So we have some other different, I know that there was some other like stress cycle and stuff mentioned. But Christina is the first. So we'll give the credit to her. In my case, I was approaching work wrong. I was thinking, what is wrong with me? There is something wrong with me. I need to do something about this. But there actually was nothing wrong with me. There were just stressors in the work environment that I didn't even realize at the time. Now I know, I can look back, of course I was experiencing burnout, but at the time, again, no one said anything to me, and I didn't consider that could be anything because I liked my job. I liked the work that I was doing. Like I said, I had good coworkers. But what else was happening? So we're going to kind of break this down into 3 different lenses really quick. On the personal side of things, my spouse was also deployed at this time. So I was alone, which is why she stayed with me, which created probably a large stressor. Again, this is not a work stressor, but it definitely probably like decreased on my resources side. Generally, I just had a lack of community. We had just moved. I was not very connected in general. I had taken up a hobby to try and like fix how I was feeling because I thought, maybe I'm lonely or I need something to do. So I started a woodworking business, a hobby that turned into a business. So that didn't really help necessarily. That was only adding to my workload and my stress because I was in the garage like every night doing things. Again, I was in my master's degree at this time, working full time, doing an internship, harsh winter. So again, there were choices made on my end, probably kind of overloaded myself as the nature of probably a lot of us on this call. In my role, I kind of mentioned feast or famine, boredom or crisis. That just created some instability when I like a bit of structure, but it also made it hard on the days when there was just really nothing to do. I felt like I was like, had no one to really talk to. Everyone else was busy. I felt like kind of ineffective in that sense. I did make some things to do over time, but it took some learning. There were a lot of red tape and just lack of processes in general that slowed things down, especially when it comes to like keeping people safe and arguing with commanders, little old me. So that was kind of difficult. The 24/7 on call, if you've worked on call, that's just a stressor looming. Like I can still hear the ringtone in my ear if I think about it enough. And like my boundaries around that as a new professional, like wanting to prove myself, like I hate to admit that I probably have like gotten out of the shower before to like answer a phone call, which is terrible. Like this, okay, it's a crisis line, but like it says leave your number and I'll get back to you within like 5 minutes. I could have done that at least. So I don't know if that resonates, but again, my boundaries choices were made. But again, I didn't know at the time. I wish someone was telling me some of these things before I started. And just in the role generally, again, I was a contractor. I was not a GS employee and I was not an active duty member. So I didn't have a ton of authority behind my name, even though it was very important for me to sometimes be involved in leadership decisions when it came to keeping people safe. In my work environment, it was a shared office space. I did have my own office at one point, but there was some leadership ego happening that required a different office shift. And then I had an office mate who was great, but that doesn't really lend well when you have to interview victims of domestic violence and you have someone sitting right next to you. So I had to go somewhere else that was still not a private space to do my job, which didn't feel like my work was valued very much. My manager directly at one point was under investigation for some unethical behavior, not on my lens. But once I knew that this was happening, a whole lot of things started to make more sense. And just generally kind of by myself, lack of training. Bye, Brittany, for an emergency. Take care of yourself. Hopefully you can watch the recording. So generally, like, we can see that we have some stressors happening. These are like now looking back, I'm like, oh, yes, I loved my job. I liked the people I worked with. And this makes sense, maybe while I was feeling this way. Brooke said on-call positions are so hard. I know some of you constantly on call due to the nature of moms going into labor and needing support. Bless. Yes, this is such an important role and so valuable to have too, which again makes it difficult to set some of those boundaries. But the reason that I shared my story, and that was not the only, unfortunately, time I experienced burnout, but it was one of the last and most significant, because from then on, I kind of worked to find a role with alignment of those values first and foremost. And so now I have more of a career portfolio that aligns specifically in the employee experience and well-being space. So it feels better. But I think we've all been here before. We could all list times, maybe even right now, where there's things happening in your personal life that are overwhelming, that things in your role are kind of just adding up. And there's maybe friction in your work environment. And this is kind of creating these burnout impacts that we are talking about here. So if you have been here before, just know that you are not alone. We know you're not alone, but you're certainly, there's something that we can do to fix it. And I know that's kind of the question that you're asking. Mandy said, I remember someone early on telling me, don't just walk away from your computer at night, shut it down. And it was so valuable as a remote worker when it's easy to check email. Yeah, that's such a good tip. It's like a more of a sensory transition, total shut off, right? Like you're completely changing the environment to remove the temptation. And so I think that's a good lens to think about some of these things. So in my case, what I could have done is a lot different, but your solution to your stress should match your stressor, which is why if you're finding it, like Mandy says, difficult to disconnect at work, the solution isn't to just say like, oh, go have a bubble bath. It's helpful maybe in the moment, and it's doing nothing to actually address the stressor. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about for the rest of this, right? I was feeling very isolated at the time. I got better once I asked people for help and support, and I just started reaching out. I had a lack of structure and process in my role because I was just kind of left independently. So I could have created my own structures and followed them, right? I could have used a planner or my own kind of self-accountability or follow-up system. I could have even provided reports to the rest of my team as a way to have some structure and accountability on my end if I wanted to. If you're in a position where you have too many back-to-back meetings and you have some autonomy over your schedule a little bit, in this case, it's like too many back-to-back meetings. I was meeting with commanders, sharing the same exact information with them every single time. So I just condensed it to one meeting per week with all the stakeholders where they're all getting the same information. This required some finesse with the calendar, but it saved me like 4 extra hours per week. And so what we're talking about here is called job crafting. This is you as an employee kind of taking ownership over your role or things in the work environment that you have control over to help address the stress directly. And so this is, if we're going to say anything is a cure for burnout, which again, it's systemic, and I don't know if we can ever give one solid answer, job crafting for you guys, especially in this role, is going to be your solution. So now it's our turn. So Brooke has prepared us some fun activities, I think, some fun homework. And we have, let me make sure that you can read the bottom part of it, a little bit of a case study. And we have a few different ones. I think we're doing okay with time. So we'll go through them. I want you to just take a moment and read this, and then we will get back into Mentimeter in just a second. So have that handy as well. Okay, here's your question. After reading this, What stressors were present? Multiple emergencies. Yeah. Competing priorities is always a stress. Different macro systems, documentation, meetings, no pause, one case to another, no rest. Yeah. A full calendar, workload, high stakes. Yeah. Just the pressure of what she's dealing with. Amount of work, lack of planning, no rest, no balance. Yeah. I know that was kind of a longer one, but these all make sense, right? So you all have a good example. Like you have good kind of framework for picking out the specific stressors. When I tell you this is a skill, it is a skill. You all probably have a leg up just because of the work that you do and helping other people kind of identify some of this stuff. But for yourself, the better that you can get at doing this for yourself, sitting down, I recommend I do it once a week. What's going well, what needs work for me personally in my role, in my work environment, and I'll have a handout for you at the end that has that kind of framework in it, is going to be a lifesaver for you because you can start to get very specific about what some of these stressors are for you. And then you can ask, what do I do about these things? Instead of, this is how we get out of that cycle, right? Like we can, in the little amount of energy that we do have left over, let's shift, make things more efficient. Let's automate. Let's do some things to help address some of these stressors. So you all have here time pressure, workload, emergencies, documentation, community, rest. So I'm excited to see kind of what we went with. So you all kind of identified these things, right? I immediately kind of picked out requires immediate follow-up, documentation, coordination with multiple symptoms or systems. So that was shown in the slide before. Little time to pause or process. I saw a bunch of those comments. Calendar is full, documentation piles up, replays conversation. So kind of these emotional boundaries, not present. I could have also done at the very top here, community-based, right? Like that in itself, I have been there before. I know that's a stressor. Even just like figuring out what you're going to eat when it's like 300 degrees out is a hard thing unless you want to eat from a restaurant every time. So being community-based, there are those of you that are, I feel you. What are some potential then solutions? What ideas can you guys think that match? If you can think back to the stressor that you put in, what could be a potential solution for this person? Yeah, priority list. Being honest with yourself about the priorities is also helpful. Yeah. Professional community blocked documentation hours. So yeah, some time blocking, kind of your own personal organization management system. So allowing for that. So not scheduling people right on top of each other if you can help it, leaving time for your documentation, streamlined or template documentation. Templates are so good. I love this. Any way that you could make it easier on yourself, especially if you can have them like already in your Google or your team or your Outlook ready to go. That's helpful. Whatever documentation system you have, pulling up a template and just replacing the basics. Cushion time, firm boundaries, phone outside, off of work hours, limit on call days. Yeah, totally. There's probably a process that they can follow in the meantime while you're off work. So let them do that. Protocol for emergencies and asking help when you need it. Yep. To-do list. Sierra says prioritizing planning as much as to do, big on to-do lists, setting good boundaries, note taking for easier documentation. Does anyone use collaborative documentation still? Is this a thing? Are we using AI? I don't really know the parameters for some of that. So in this setting, we're looking at like back to things that are going to reduce the rush feeling or taking time in between, being more intentional with priorities. The only other thing that I could think of here that wasn't necessarily mentioned again is that community setting. So that would be more like kind of on the person to plan ahead. So like having something in your car that has all of the needed supplies that you might need throughout the day, hand sanitizer, wipes, anything that you may need to do your job well, extra snacks, extra waters, kind of that. So you're not getting into a bind where if you go over in a session, now you can't eat lunch or something like that. Good comments in the chat from Mandy, asking for help when you need it, taking pauses, asking clients what they can do so you're not doing all the work. That's so empowering. It's such a great recommendation. Everyone take that one away, write that down. Collaborative documentation saved Brooke a ton in community setting. Me too. I think it's helpful. Even on meetings now too, I think it's helpful. And just letting people know what you're doing. They don't really care, I think, as long as they know what you're doing and you share up front, hey, I'm going to take notes while we do this. So if I'm not looking at you, that's why. But that can help you save time after the fact. Of course, there are cases where maybe you just don't do that and it's not appropriate, but yes, thank you for putting that in there. So I'm going to give Brooke these answers too, so she can disseminate and you have them all for yourselves as well. That's good. Okay, we have another one. Tanya is a registered nurse. I'll let you all read that. All right, are we feeling good about this one? Same question. What stressors are present here with Tanya? Sarah says workload, skipping lunch, emergencies, complex cases. Yeah, this one was full. Increased workload for sure. Lack of time. Not eating, not taking care of herself. Yeah, you can see how it kind of, again, gets into this spiral, or it's kind of a cycle. The interesting thing about this one, so excessive workload, not able to meet basic needs, workload, scope creep, time management. So we can see both lenses, right? We have like so much empathy, I think, and compassion for the person that is like, feels like they have so much that they can't stop and take time for themselves. Carla put they're overloaded. And then they have this other lens of like, well, there's maybe some scope creep. Maybe there's some time management. Is someone taking on more than they should, out of good intention? And again, I think I kind of just have a lot of empathy for this. I think this is a really hard place to be, especially in professions like this. It's like we want to do our best work. And what ends up happening when we try to do too much is that we actually don't do enough for anyone. Or I know that works out for me. Like I'll be getting back to people way later than anticipated because I am overloaded, or I have dropped a ball because there's just like something, it's too much, right? And so in an effort to be very helpful, I'm actually now not helpful at all. I'm not helpful because I am not taking care of myself, but I'm also not helpful because I can't show up in the way that I want to. So there's kind of like these two lenses. And with most people, especially the people that I work with, if we focus on these basics, building up and bolstering some of this resilience while increasing the skill of time management, setting boundaries around scope creep, then you're actually way more effective. And you kind of see this inverse happen where the workload starts to feel manageable because you are more effective at the times when you are working instead of just trying to power through. I don't know if anyone has ever sat down and tried to do like a presentation or write a paper. When you are depleted, it takes you probably 5 times longer than if you would have just stepped away and, came back at it with a new or refreshed eye. So here, we're thinking about workload has steadily increased. We have staffing shortages, skipping lunch. So you guys were spot on with this. Feedback from supervisors focuses on overdue documentation rather than the complexity. So this is like actually something that's a stressor, not necessarily in Tanya's control. This is like a leadership or work environment type of stressor. So I'll be interested to see kind of what we come up with this, but it's causing her to feel kind of just discouraged, exhausted when we focus on everything that's overdue, but we also have things due in the moment. That's kind of hard too. So what are some potential solutions to these stressors? And I'm looking forward to these because you all had some really good examples the first time. More time management, organized calendar, priority lists, packing snacks, eating lunch on the go. Yep, very tangible things. Like these things seem so, I don't want to say like simple necessarily, but they're just difficult to follow through on for me personally, especially, but they do help. She can provide her manager with how she will schedule her work and take on the extra caseload with the option to revisit later if needed. So communication, almost like a managing up type of approach with her manager in the moment. So I'll show you kind of an example of what this looks like in the mind of someone that is burnt out. And so this is a wonderful example for this. There it was a stressor created by the manager. There is a potential solution, and here's why it's hard. Because when you are experiencing those burnout symptoms and you're feeling kind of exhausted and you're feeling cynical, the thought sometimes becomes like, why should I have to be the one to put in extra work when they should just do it? Like, they are the leader. They should just know. They should not be doing this. They should be thinking better, those kind of things. That comes up a lot. And so if that is crossed your mind, like, it shouldn't be on me to fix something that the organization is doing wrong. I just want to acknowledge that that is a very real thought and scenario that happens frequently. And I do think the people that do truly want to get themselves out of these burnout cycles, we do eventually. I have not come across a single person. I probably worked with like 1,000 people individually at this point, like a ton of them. There's not a single one of them that didn't have something that they could personally control and change and adjust in their habits, their thinking, their boundaries. So I set my little soapbox and disclaimer there. Have a conversation about caseload with bosses and managers, time management, establish limits for quantity. That's a good one. Pre-thinking about plannings, food, snacks, and lunches. Something else I've kind of seen similar to this space is like planning with your leader on the intensity of cases. Like, if they can help plan, like, okay, we have these ones coming in. We know that you already have like 3 very high risk and like 1 that's okay for now. That requires, right, communication and collaboration. And sometimes you just have an open space and someone has to be put there and it isn't as balanced. But if you can kind of get creative, again, with that job crafting and helping shape some of that, it can produce more consistency for you. So these are all really good examples. Just for the sake of time, we have a few others, but we will move through because I want to talk more about you. So as we are thinking about everything that we have learned in the next 24 hours or so, I want you to start to do, and maybe you already have been, kind of an internal audit or reflection about what stressors are present in your life. So if you had to fill out a chart similar to what I had on mine, what would you put in there in your personal life and your professional life and your role in the work environment? So we can start to think about that. Right now for you, what do you think is your biggest role specific stressor? So this is you and your actual job. So the way you're interacting with your work, not necessarily other people in your work environment or your physical work environment either. Sierra said deadlines, meetings, remote fatigue. If you want to come off and explain what you mean by that, we can brainstorm for you. Deadlines and meetings, emotional energy and investment that you give to your cases. Yeah, you just care. That's a hard one, right? It's caring less. And in addition to like, how do we do that, right? This is another reason why it's not the cure for burnout, because it, for people that do really value, right, going back to values like dedication and maybe collaboration or generosity, helpfulness, impact, it's a value misalignment for you to try and not care. And so it's kind of creating the same kind of stress and friction as if you were just like, oh, I don't care about them. So that's a hard one. Deadlines and emotional investment, balancing everything, the political environment and its effects on the client lives and organization, 1000%. That is a tough thing right now, and not a ton inside of your control either. So that is kind of one of those things like, okay, in this tough time, how can I build up my resources to help? Taking on added responsibilities despite burnout. Yeah. And to that one, I would kind of just say, like, what about those feels like you need to? Are you being told to? Is it that you feel like you need to prove yourself? Are you trying to make an intentional move up or different in your career? So context is always like good for understanding what your possible solution could be. Carla said balancing everything. With the meetings too, and or like deadlines, like we could get even more specific. What about meetings is stressful? Is it the amount of meetings? Is it the time of day that the meetings are? Is it the preparation for meetings? Is it you showing up on the actual meeting? Like, is there a dynamic there that is hard, or something about public speaking that's difficult? So getting even more specific helps to kind of pinpoint exactly what it is that you're working on. What is your biggest work environment stressor? This is kind of like broader. It could be people, it could be system, it could be your physical workspace. So I saw some remote fatigue there. Planning for program longevity, making sure clients get what they need with the resources that we have currently. Yep, that's a good, very valid. It's hard to be strategic when you don't know what the future may hold. Tension with coworkers, yeah, everyone. If a lot of people are experiencing burnout, then everyone's cynical, and then it gets to be an even more difficult in work environment. I have been places before, just coming in to consult or speak, where you can feel it. Like before, they're trying their best, but you can physically actually feel it walking in. And so those are always fun things, because I'm there to help, and hopefully we can be honest about some of the things. So those are always actually really cool sessions. They uncover a lot, and they can make some good progress. So this one's hard. Funding, I think, could come up here, right? Physical workspace for me, again, was a big stressor. Just like, even though I have an office, like a dedicated office with a door, my family was home all summer, all three of my spouse and my two children. And it was like so hard for me to work and feel like it almost created more guilt knowing that they were down there instead of just at school or work. And so that was really hard for me. So that was a stressor. I kind of want to, there's a few other questions we have here. This is one that I wanted to make sure we touch on. This is something that you are doing. What is a personal system or habit that helps at work? So again, burnout, we're not talking about personal stressors necessarily, but this one, everyone always has really creative or thoughtful things. And so in the spirit of sharing with our colleagues here, do you have something that works really well for you that helps you streamline your at-home space, or that works really well for you getting to work and feeling like, okay, I can actually take on the day well? Something that has come up a lot in this one is like larger calendaring, specifically a few times the Skylight digital calendar has come up. So I always like to throw that out there as a thought. If you're managing like a lot in your household, or you have roommates or whatever it is, like it's a all-in-one, everyone has an app. The best part is if you have like PDF type reminders of things, like different flyers, you can screenshot them and upload them to the app, and it will automatically put them on your calendar. So it is a good resource that I enjoy as well. Walking away for 5 minutes and taking a breath, talking to coworkers is Carla's. Yes, I love a good walk. Just stepping away can really reset. Work weekly meeting plan and to-do list notebook system for Sierra. Strong communication with coworkers to make sure we're on the same page and can share responsibilities and work as a team. Yes, communication through and through is one of the best assets and resources that you have to make your life go smoother. And if you can get really good at it and not feel necessarily cynical about being the one that initiates or models that, it works even better for you too. Outlook calendar reminders, making to-do lists. Yes, live and die by the calendar. For sure. Weekly plan and to-do list, notebook system. Good. Walking away. These are all helpful. Pep talks, truth reminders. Sometimes you do just need to vent, and that's okay too. So if any of you work together, I don't know if you do or not, and it's both attended this training, you can say, am I venting, or do I want to help brainstorm solutions? And if any of you have teams that you lead, this is also an important skill to teach them too. So if they're coming to you kind of venting, frustrated, not complaining necessarily, but they have stressors, you can kind of reinforce this conversation with them and help them identify, okay, what is actually creating the friction for you right now? Where do you feel like you're blocked? What is the stressor? And they may not know the solution. You may, or maybe you could brainstorm together, but you kind of using that time with them to help them identify their stressor and kind of figure out a solution in a very collaborative way is really helpful for them as well, because when they are feeling supported by you in that way, then that also helps your workload and stress levels too. Where someone works out in the morning, yes, that's great. My home workspace is not my bedroom. That separation is huge. You need some sort of something, whether it's a door or a sign or whatever it may be. Keeping notes of encouragement, yes, that's a good one. So again, like a brag file or something. So these are great examples. We do have just a few more things to cover. So before I do that, I just want to say we have 10 minutes left and I want to leave some time for specific questions. So I'll stop sharing here in just a second. But we'll enter in the questions here if that is okay, or we can also do them in the chat, or you can come off mute. So whatever your preference is, I don't know, Brooke, if you have a preference, but if you want to keep the questions, maybe put them in the presentation.
Yeah, either way, you all are free to come off mute or put them in the chat and I can read them out. Anybody has questions? It can be specific to your situation or just burnout in general. Any questions? Don't all jump at once.
Someone has one. Oh, we will. Even if you just want to share something that works really well for you too, that's fine too.
That's true.
That's a good question. Do you have advice for when a coworker is a major contributor to burnout? I have lots of advice for this. So I'm just trying to think about what angle we could go from this from. So I would ask probably why. Bye, Carla. Thanks for your participation. I would ask probably a few questions in return to this. So one would be like, do you think that they are experiencing burnout is something that I would have a question about, because that can help you figure out how to approach the situation. Because if it's someone that is dropping the ball or super negative around you, like it could also be that maybe they're experiencing some of that, and maybe some education could be helpful for them, or you kind of supporting them in that way potentially. If the person is just generally creating stress, or they maybe operate differently from you, then you could look at maybe the potential cause being somewhat of a value misalignment potentially. The advice that I have is not necessarily tangible, but just more something to think about here. So when we think about those three categories, we're looking for alignment or stress kind of reduction in all three areas. So you personally, in your role and in your work environment, you have the most control over you as a person. So your boundaries that you set with that person, how you view them, how you communicate with them, what you may advocate for in conversations with them, or if you need to take it to the next level, like you have the option to potentially do that. In your role, we don't necessarily have total control about the tasks we have to do day to day, but our approach to them or the way that we might organize ourselves or our systems, we usually have moderate control over that. And so you can think about like, how is this person impacting the actual physical work that I'm doing? And that can be a way. But when you zoom out to the work environment, and when you're thinking about someone else and just like the way and the core, like fundamental way that they're showing up, creating burnout or contributing to it, unfortunately, the work environment is where we kind of have the least amount of influence, because we can't control other people. Organizational change and structures take a long time to happen. Sometimes this behavior is kind of reinforced by leadership too, and that's hard. And so when it's someone else specifically, especially if it's your manager, so I think the Gallup most recent piece of information is 70% of an employee's well-being is dictated by their manager or supervisor. So take that also as a grain of salt or in consideration when you're thinking about answering this question. So advice I have is the same advice generally. So figure out what exactly about the coworker is stressful. Are they impacting me personally in my role, or is this like a larger work environment issue? And then you can ask like, what's in my control to change? So have I talked to this person? Can I go to my manager? Can I work with them to create a different solution? Can I just kind of leave it alone and try to focus elsewhere? Or if it's something significant enough that you don't necessarily have control over, sometimes this requires a shift in teams. It does require you to leave and go somewhere else. And so that's not necessarily off the table. That's not the first thing that I would ever try unless it's a situation where you don't feel safe, or you're in danger potentially. So I don't know if that answered fully, but if it's the coworker, kind of the approach is the same. We want to figure out what about the coworker is specifically stressful, and then figure out from there if it's something that you can experiment with in trying different potential things in your toolbox. But if you have worked through all of the things in your toolbox, boundary setting, hard conversations, escalations, that kind of thing, and it's still impacting you, that usually is a good sign that a change is needed on a larger scale. Let's see, push into, so we answered that one. Next one is, what kind of services do you provide at the organizational level to promote an environment that is less conducive to staff burnout? That's a very good question. So for an organization, this really comes down to a very fundamental things. And so for as far as like services, I do consulting in a few different areas. I can come in and do workshops and speaking like this. I also work sometimes one-on-one with leaders and do like embedded burnout coaching that way. But when we're looking at organizationally, this is when I come in typically at the very like start of a strategy planning session, or if a company is looking to rebrand their mission and values, because it truthfully like starts at that core. So if we're thinking about everything that was on that list of stressors, workload, even the resources like having a coaching culture, or leaders that don't micromanage, like all of that stuff is even way beyond like, here's a wellness app, or here's a fun thing to do on Fridays. It starts at the fundamental strategy and strategic planning of the business. So sometimes I will help organizations rework their mission and values in a way that makes more sense with their employees, or I will help them operationalize their values through the employee experience. So for example, where I work currently, one of their values is boundless optimism. And so we may audit the entire employee life cycle, from the website where they apply online, to the interview process, to the hiring and onboarding process, to the development process, to leadership growth and promotions, all the way to offboarding and exit interviews. We may look at that whole cycle and think like, are the values of this organization showing up tangibly in each of these areas? So that's kind of the lens that I provide from the organizational level. So there's some systemic and more iframe approaches there. Much deeper than like what most people think for burnout is like, oh, here's a meditation, which I do think is helpful. But again, helpful to a degree when we're talking about systemic and organizational changes. So
it makes me think, Kelsey, just real quick, there's a book by Peter Senge. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The Fifth Discipline, maybe. And there's a whole section in there about shared visioning and like getting everyone on the same page. And I think like you just spoke to that a lot. It's like a lot of times people may be feeling burned out because there's no like shared, common, or maybe there you do have a shared common, purpose, but you don't know, or you don't know what it is. And that needs to be funneled and like driven down into something way more specific. So I like that you included that. It's important.
Yeah. If you want to put the name of the book, I don't exactly know what you're talking about, Brooke, but it would be interesting to see. I like the concept, obviously, it makes total sense. But like even that strategically, like looking at things, if everyone's on the same page, is it something with internal comms that needs to change, right? Like I've worked in organizations or with them. At the most recent one that I did a workshop, someone said like, we would just like to know. I come in sometimes and like someone's left my team and I'd had no idea. Or like they, just hiring and firing, like not that it's like totally everyone's business, but if they're a team member you work with, just even basic communication like that is like something really helpful sometimes. So definitely with shared vision. Okay, does anyone else, I don't want to like sit and linger if no one has questions. I'm happy to stay for a little bit longer if anyone wants to stay on. I do have one last thing. So I mentioned I would have a handout for you. I'm not going to spam you with anything. So just know that you won't get any spam, but this is also helpful for Brooke. It's helpful for me if you would scan or use the QR code, and I'll put the link as well for Brooke in the email, and just let us know how you felt about this session and we can give you feedback. And after you complete this, you will get the handout. It's fillable and printable. So you can download it, and it is basically the same method that I use and I use with my clients on a weekly basis. So it's the your role, your work environment, working well, not working, and then there's some reflective questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, for presenting on this awesome topic, and for just your vulnerability and teaching us and allowing us to share and come up with some really actionable steps. We really appreciate your time and for you being here. And we'll make sure that everyone has your information to get connected, and we will see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.